Good day, friends. Against the backdrop of Israel Hamas and Ukraine Russian wars, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh yesterday spoke about the need for reforms in the United Nations and the need for a new international order. Now, the thing is, if Modi government is indeed serious, then it can play a very important role in crafting the new international order as well as in reforms of the United Nations provided it seriously considers the offer made by Russia 1 year ago of reviving the RIC. Now, it is no coincidence that President Putin announced in Moscow on 14th June 2024 the need for a Eurasian security architecture. And since August last year, Russia has been asking India, both privately as well as publicly, that it needs to consider the revival of the RIC seriously. I will explain all this. RIC, we know, is a grouping of three countries: Russia, India, China. And this grouping was framed by Russian Foreign Minister Primikov in the late 90s. The thinking of Primikov at that time was that because Russia has foreign policy both to the east and the west, so he brought together in East two populous countries, India and China, and clubbed them along with Russia. It became RIC. And in terms of geopolitics, what is called the balance of power politics, Primikov felt that at some later date, this grouping can be the counterweight to the West. So, what happened was that slowly over time, while these three countries came together in this grouping, the Chinese realized that because of their spectacular economic rise, their contribution in RIC cannot be in terms of geopolitics, which is the Russian strength. It had to be in geoeconomics, and that is what they did. And we also know that RIC eventually became BRICS in 2011. And the relations, when it became BRICS between India and China, they were normal. Now, when the Modi government came to power in 2014, coincidentally, this was also the time that the world order changed from unipolar to a multipolar world. And since then, under the Modi government, we know that relations between India and China, they have dipped, and today they are not normal. Now, against this backdrop, we know that after a gap of 4 years, President Putin is coming to on an official visit to India in the first week of December, and the clear focus will be on lot of purchases. I won't go in the details because all those details will come in the media. I want to talk about the subject RIC, which is likely to be underplayed in the media and which I believe is a very important thing. Now, so he is coming now, so the focus will be on trade and various deals. And we know that India has already announced the creation of new two consulates in Russia. But here is the point. Whatever the deals, the target of trade between India and Russia over the next 5 years until 2030 has been set at a measly $100 billion. Why measly? Because the target that India has set with America in the bilateral trade is 5 times more. It is 500 billion until 2030. So it is very clear that in terms of trade, the Modi government is tilted towards America decisively. Not only that, the Modi government has committed itself to a strategic role with America. Never mind that the Trump administration does not want to give a strategic role to India. And it is very clear that in terms of military, India now is embedded in the US Indo Pacific Command. And in terms of politics, in terms of foreign policy, the Modi government's foreign policy, which is Act East policy, is totally aligned today with the American Indo Pacific strategy. And a clear manifestation of that is Quad. So, once again, the tilt is towards America as far as strategic issues are concerned. Now, not only that, as I did a video 2 days back on India's relations with China, I explained that while the relations seem to be improving, they will not normalize because India wants to be seen in a regional competition with China. India wants to be seen as the biggest power in South Asia, or if I may use the word, as the regional hegemon in South Asia, and as well as the Indian Ocean region, which it considers its backyard. Now, another thing that has come up is about the Ukraine war. Ukraine war certainly is coming to an end. It will either be decided on the battlefield and very soon with the win of Russia, or it is likely to be decided by President Trump's 28-point plan for ending the Ukraine war. Either way, it is very clear that the future of NATO and EU is uncertain now. What is also clear is that the line between West Europe and Russia again will be very uncertain and unstable for some time. So, the point to make is there are certain things which are very clear about the ending of the Ukraine war, and these are that what NATO had thought of doing at its summit in Madrid in 2022, that it will be the interconnection between Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific, that will not happen. It will not go to the Indo-Pacific region, NATO, that is clear. What is also clear, as I said, is that the West Europe and Russia line is uncertain, so there is a void here. And this is the reason that President Putin thought of having a Eurasian security architecture, because there is a void now that needs to be filled up. And the good news that is likely to come out of this war is, if the plan of President Trump is accepted for peace in Ukraine, that is that America wants to do trade with Russia, and progressively the sanctions on Russia, they are to be lifted. This obviously will help in India's relations with Russia as well. Now, the thing is that what President Putin has thought of filling the void with a Eurasian security architecture, let us now consider how this fits in what I explained in my last video also, that a new global governance system for the creation of a new international order or a new world order has been crafted. It is an entirely different vision. So let us see where this fits. Now, I explained yesterday, let me quickly just say things once more, that this new vision, which has been crafted or which has support of Russia as well as China, it is about multipolar world, it is about multipolarity, it is about treating all nations as equality of nations. It is about having United Nation based rules and UN based international law. It is about no export of ideology at all, and it is about allowing all countries under the United Nations, which is 193 countries, to choose their own foreign policy and their own development path. And it is about indivisible security. I explained in very short, it is about no zero sum game. Zero sum game is the hallmark, or it is a distinctive feature of the system where India wants to be, which is working under the Americans, and which is where the global north is. It is the global south nations which are getting attracted to this new global governance system. Now, there is an important point that needs to be made. After all, as I have explained in my earlier videos, China and Russia, they are great powers, two great powers which are aligned in the vision. But as we can see from the RIC, the strength of Russia is geopolitics, while the strength of China is geoeconomics. So there is a bit of a difference in how they see multipolarity in this new vision. And I will only here talk about how Russia sees it, because on China I have spoken earlier also. Now, as far as Russia is concerned, it talks about a multipolar polycentric world. What this means is that while the world is multipolar with 193 countries, it will require many power centers, so that region wise they all can sort of work together in a particular region. So there will be some power center, means some bigger countries there. So in other words, it is about balance of power politics. Now, it is well known when you talk of balance of power politics, it works best as we have seen in the Cold War when there are two blocks or there are two nations. When there are more than two nations, and here we are talking of lot of power centers, then obviously it cannot remain very stable. And a few months back, President Putin also, when he was talking, his giving his annual talk at the Valdai Discussion Club, he conceded that this multipolar, polycentric world that the Russians are talking about, it will be unstable in the long term. So this he conceded. Now the point is, why will it be unstable? And the reason is very simple, that when we are talking of different power centers, in that power center, let's say there are 10 countries. Now, out of those countries, 10 countries, there are two countries or three countries which are bigger. So while all should be allowed, all 10 should be allowed to decide what they want to do for a particular center, or let's say South Asia, everybody should be allowed to decide what they want to do, but it will not be possible in the balance of power thinking. So therefore, one or two countries will perhaps decide for the minority, will decide for the majority, for the rest. So issues which will always be there of the smaller nations which will not get addressed will primarily be about sovereignty, will primarily be about security. And this is the reason why President Putin felt that to have this stability, there is a need for a Eurasian security architecture which can look after security and sovereignty of all these power centers, different ones, and without any outside the Eurasia countries or powers coming and meddling there. And as I said, in any case, he saw the opportunity of a void also at the end of the Ukraine war, a void where a Eurasian security architecture can come. So he saw that. Now, so as far as India is concerned, we know that India also, like Russia, it believes in balance of power politics. But there's a difference, big difference between India and Russia. And the difference is that India believes in a zero sum game because that colonial mindset, because it still thinks like, as I said, the American led order, which is not the case with the Russians because they are in this new global governance system. So, what President Putin did was that once he decided that yes, this was necessary to plug this big gap, which will come to bring stability in this balance of power, multipolar, polycentric world, he visited at the beginning of his fifth term in office. His first foreign visit was to China. He went to China, and in March of 2024, the exact date is 16th of March 2024, Xi and Putin, they had a meeting, they had a discussion in Beijing, and both agreed that yes, there was a need for a Eurasian security architecture, which also aligned very well with Xi's vision, which is the global security architecture. It is at a global level. President Putin is talking of the Eurasian level. Why global level? That's a different story. So I will not talk that here, but both the leaders agreed. Therefore, once President Putin came back in Moscow, he announced on 14th of June 2024 that there was a need for a Eurasian security architecture, and he specifically said that there are some hotspots in the Eurasian way which need to be plugged, where they need the Eurasian solutions. And the centers that he said are the hotspots, identified hotspots are South Caucasus, Middle East, South Asia, Afghanistan, and the Korean Peninsula. Now, South Asia stands out amongst all these for two reasons. One, in South Asia, the three nations which have a problem with one another, they all have nuclear weapons, and two of these nations are founding members of BRICS. And hence, resolving the South Asia issue becomes very important. So, as I said, in thinking of the Russians, there has to be a Eurasian solution, and it should be about indivisible security. That means while all the countries in a particular region, they must understand that we are not talking about zero sum, about absolute security, but they should be able to talk with one another about their core concerns and see how a solution can be found to that. And then, in this thinking of Eurasian security architecture, all these power centers, they will also have their horizontal alignments, which means that if outside help is required, it all should be from within the Eurasian security architecture. This is the thinking. Now I come back to talking of RIC and why the Russians have been telling India for the last 1 year to revive the RIC. Now, the first thing that everybody is aware of is that Modi government actually has utilized RIC in its tenure two times. It has sought Russia's help to avoid a war with China. So it has utilized the RIC first uh, after the 2017 Doklam crisis, when Prime Minister Modi met with President Xi in Wuhan in 2018, and back to back, he had another summit meeting in Sochi with President Putin. So that was the RIC format. Once again, the RIC format has been utilized by India after the Galwan killings that happened on the 15th June 2020, when Moscow's help was sought. And Jay Shankar and Wang Yi, the foreign ministers of India and China, in Moscow, in the presence of Sergei Lavrov, they signed the 10th September 2020 joint statement for peace and stability and a modus vivendi for the line of actual control. Now, the problem is India does not want to revive this format at all since the Galwan killings, and that is what is being urged of India by the Russians, that it do that. Now, if it was to do that, then you see, after all, uh, defense minister is talking of crafting a new international order. That is precisely what will happen. Now, if India was to do that, revive the RIC, what that would mean is that it will bring Russia, India, China together in a mediate, if not a mediatory role, in just a consultancy role. The Russians could be there, President Putin could be there, perhaps at the summit meeting, and the differences between India and China, they can be resolved. Now, India says, sorry, the problem is the border question. You see, border is a very complex question. And all I can say at this stage, without digressing from our main discussion, is that it is not entirely China's fault as to why things have happened, but this is a different story. I won't discuss it here. But there is certainly a need for India and China to normalize their relations, so that can be done under the RIC format. And if that happens, that means they can do a very valuable contribution to the Eurasian security architecture, which I have just explained. It fits in very well with the new global governance system, which is the system that will be used to craft the new international order that the defense minister Rajnath Singh is talking about. Not only that, you see, BRICS has become a very important organization, an institution. Today, it has 10 permanent members and it has 10 partner countries. And BRICS today has, with India there, it has 40% of the world population and it has 38% of the world GDP. And the whole idea is of BRICS, because dollar has been weaponized by America and the Western countries as to how to displace dollar. Plenty has been said on this. So the bottom line here is the displacement of dollar. Plenty of ways are being looked at. A key thing is as to how all these countries can do local trade through their payment system. And that is what all the BRICS countries and the partner countries, they are doing. So India, if it participates in this completely, totally, then it can be a very valuable member in crafting of the new international order. Not only that, if India does that, become tilts towards where it should be in the global south, then even the what the new global governance system talks about, reforms in the Bretton Woods institution, which is the IMF and the World Bank and the WTO, they all can be done because if India puts its weight behind the RIC and BRICS. That is the key thing. And as far as UN reform is concerned, it is very clear to anybody that the UN reforms are required, more participation of global South nations is required in the UN. That is the reform. But this can only happen if the new international order or the new world order first stabilizes. And that is where, as I said, if India was to seriously consider the Russian offer of the RIC, India can have a very influential, important role to play in this. Thank you so much.